Imagine finding a dusty old box in your grandmother's attic. Inside, there's a worn leather journal with Soviet military stamps, filled with handwritten notes about a secret underground city that housed over people. A city that didn't exist on any map. That's exactly what happened to me last summer, and what I discovered next left me speechless. But before I tell you that story, here's something that will blow your mind. The Soviet Union had a computer that predicted its own collapse, and no one listened. If you think that's interesting, wait until you hear about the lake of nuclear waste that could power all of Europe for 50 years, if anyone could figure out how to get to it safely. Welcome to the dark and fascinating world of the USSR's best-kept secrets, and trust me, by the end of this video, you'll question everything you thought you knew about the Cold War. Let's start with that mysterious journal I found, but first, did you know that the Soviet Union had its own version of the internet? In 1959, they created a nationwide computer network called OGAS, decades before the World Wide Web. But here's the twist. It was shut down because factory managers were terrified it would expose their lies about production numbers. Speaking of lies, the USSR had entire cities that didn't exist on any map. These were called closed cities or secret cities. The most famous was Arzama 16, now known as Sarov, where the Soviet atomic bomb was developed. My grandmother's journal? It contained detailed maps of one of these cities, Krasnoyarsk -26, now known as Zheleznogorsk. Built entirely underground inside a hollowed-out mountain, it was home to a massive plutonium production facility. The fascinating part? The residents lived a life of luxury compared to the average Soviet citizen. They had access to Western goods, better food, and higher salaries. But there was a catch. They couldn't leave without special permission, and their location was so secret that even their families didn't know where they lived. Hold on, before we go deeper into these secret cities, let me show you something that will make your jaw drop. This image was taken by an American spy plane in 1963. See that mountain? Looks normal, right? Wrong. Inside were 18 levels of laboratories, apartments, schools, and even a theater, all underground. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Soviet Union didn't just build secret cities, they built entire secret societies. There was a special group of people known as the Nameless Ones, who officially didn't exist. These were the elite scientists and engineers who worked on the most classified projects. Their names were removed from all official documents. Their achievements, no matter how groundbreaking, were never publicly acknowledged. Some of them made discoveries that we're only learning about today. Take, for example, the case of Vladimir K., whose full name is still classified. In 1972, he developed a material that could bend light around objects, essentially an early version of invisibility technology. The project was so secret that when he died in 1974, his own wife thought he was just a factory manager. But before I tell you what happened to Vladimir's invention, let me share something even more mind-blowing. The Soviet Union had a secret program that successfully transmitted electrical power through the air without wires. They powered entire facilities using what they called Tesla towers. These weren't small experiments either. By 1981, they had a working prototype that could power a small town. But here's the kicker. After the fall of the USSR, all the research disappeared. Some say it was destroyed, others claim it was stolen. Remember that computer I mentioned earlier? The one that predicted the USSR's collapse? It was part of a larger system called the OGAS project. Using early artificial intelligence and economic data, it predicted not just the collapse, but the exact way it would happen. The report, dated September 12, 1985, outlined how ethnic tensions, economic stagnation, and military spending would create a perfect storm that would tear the Union apart. The officials who received the report dismissed it as a machine malfunction. Now, let's talk about something that sounds like science fiction but was very real. The Soviet Union had a psychic warfare program that would make the X-Men look tame. They spent billions of rubles on what they called psychotronics, the study of mind control and telepathy. And before you dismiss this as Cold War propaganda, declassified documents show they achieved some remarkable results. In one documented case from 1976, a test subject in Leningrad accurately described a military installation in Vladivostok, over 6,000 kilometers away. The program was so successful that it continued in secret even after the USSR's collapse. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Wait until you hear about the underground cities beneath Moscow's subway system, built to house the entire Politburo in case of nuclear war. And trust me, what they found when they opened some of these bunkers in the 1990s will leave you speechless. But first, let's go back to that journal I found in my grandmother's attic. Because what I discovered in its pages led me to uncover one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Soviet space program. And it's something that NASA still refuses to acknowledge to this day. Remember that Soviet space program secret I mentioned? Well, hold on to your seats, because what I'm about to tell you changes everything we thought we knew about the space race. In my grandmother's journal, there was a cryptic reference to something called Project Mirror. At first, I thought it was just another propaganda project, but then I found declassified documents that made my blood run cold. In 1976, the Soviets successfully launched a massive orbital mirror that could reflect sunlight down to Earth. They called it Znamya, and it was capable of illuminating entire cities at night. But here's where it gets crazy. That wasn't even their most ambitious space project. Before I reveal what they were really planning with those orbital mirrors, let me tell you about the Soviet cosmonaut who disappeared into space. Twice. His name was Andrei Mikoyan, and according to official records, he never existed. But photographs and documents from my grandmother's journal tell a different story. Mikoyan was part of a secret program called Orbital Ghost, a series of experimental flights testing the limits of human endurance in space. During his second mission in 1973, he reportedly made contact with something that the Soviets classified as Topic Zero. The mission recordings, which were only declassified in 1995, contained 3 minutes of static followed by Mikoyan's last words, "They were here first." But let's back up for a moment. Because to understand what really happened to Mikoyan, you need to know about the Soviet Union's secret space station program. And trust me, it's not what you learned in history class. While the world was watching Mir and Salyut, the Soviets had another space station, one that never appeared on any official records. They called it Shadowbox, and it was positioned in an orbit specifically calculated to be invisible to Western tracking stations. The technology they tested there would make Elon Musk jealous. Imagine a space station that could change its radar signature to appear like space debris. In 1977, they had it. They also developed a form of electromagnetic shielding that could make the station virtually invisible to both radar and visual observation. Now, here's something that will really blow your mind. The Soviets didn't just explore outer space, they went inner space too. In 1969, they drilled the world's deepest hole, known as the Kola Super Deep borehole. But what they found down there was so disturbing that the entire project was classified until after the Soviet Union's collapse. At 40,230 feet deep, their instruments picked up what seemed to be artificial sounds. Not just random noise, we're talking about rhythmic patterns that couldn't be explained by any known geological process. But that's not even the strangest part. The drill samples from that depth contained microscopic artifacts that, according to the project's chief scientist, showed signs of mechanical manipulation. Speaking of strange discoveries, let's talk about the Soviet Union's secret biological research program. Because what they achieved in their underground laboratories would make modern genetic engineers look like amateurs. In 1984, at a facility deep in the Ural Mountains, Soviet scientists successfully created something that shouldn't have been possible. They regenerated extinct plant species using DNA extracted from Siberian permafrost. They didn't just bring back one or two species, they revived an entire prehistoric ecosystem. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. According to my grandmother's journal, some of these plants exhibited signs of intelligence. One species, which they codenamed Memory Bloom, could apparently mimic any other plant it was placed next to. But it didn't just copy their appearance, it copied their chemical properties too. Now remember those Tesla towers I mentioned earlier? Well, they weren't just for transmitting power. The Soviets had discovered something else, something that challenges everything we know about physics. In 1982, during a routine power transmission test, they noticed that the towers were affecting time itself. Local time distortions were recorded, with clocks near the towers running slightly faster than those further away. The effect was small, just a few milliseconds, but it was measurable and reproducible. The Soviets had accidentally discovered a way to manipulate time, even if only slightly. But before they could develop this discovery further, something happened that forced them to shut down the entire program. Something that was directly connected to those strange sounds from the Kola Super Deep borehole. And this brings us back to Andrei Mikoyan. and his mysterious encounter in space. Because what he saw up there was somehow connected to what they found at the bottom of that hole. The Soviets had discovered something that connected the depths of the Earth to the depths of space, something that suggested we weren't alone and never had been. But to understand the full implications of this discovery, we need to talk about the Soviet Union's most secret research project, one that continued in secret even after the USSR's collapse. A project that involved consciousness transfer, quantum entanglement, and a discovery that could rewrite human history. Remember that consciousness transfer project I mentioned? Well, what I'm about to tell you connects everything we've discussed so far: the secret cities, the space program, and that mysterious hole in the Earth. But first, let me share something from the last pages of my grandmother's journal that sent chills down my spine. In 1989, just 2 years before the Soviet Union's collapse, they successfully completed something called Project Echo. It wasn't just another scientific experiment. It was an attempt to preserve human consciousness in a quantum state. And they did it. They actually did it. But before I reveal what happened to those preserved consciousness, let me tell you about the secret cultural program that made it all possible. You see, while the world thought the Soviets were suppressing culture, they were actually conducting the largest psychological experiment in human history. They created entire fictional cities, not just on paper, but in people's minds. Through a combination of mass hypnosis and what they called social architecture, they convinced thousands of people that they had memories of places that never existed. The purpose? To understand how collective consciousness worked. And what they discovered was beyond their wildest expectations. These artificial memories began to manifest physical changes in reality. People who shared these implanted memories could communicate telepathically about their shared experiences. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. In the underground facility beneath Moscow's Metro Line 2, they built something called the Consciousness Collector. Imagine a room filled with thousands of crystalline structures, each containing what Soviet scientists claimed were stored human thoughts and memories. The technology was based on discoveries they made in that deep hole in the Kola Peninsula. Remember those mechanical artifacts they found? They weren't just ancient, they were impossible. The crystals contained information storage systems more advanced than anything we have today, and the Soviets learned to replicate them. But let's talk about something even more mind-bending. The Soviet Union had a secret program to identify and track people who could naturally do what their technology was trying to achieve. They called them the remembered individuals who could access memories that weren't their own. Not just any memories, but memories of the future. In 1984, one of these individuals, a woman named Elena Baranova, wrote detailed descriptions of the Soviet Union's collapse 7 years before it happened. She also described something else, something scheduled to happen in 2027. But every copy of her predictions was destroyed in a mysterious fire in 1991. Every copy except one, the page tucked into my grandmother's journal. Now, let's connect all these dots. The secret cities weren't just for military research. They were laboratories for consciousness experiments. The space program wasn't just exploring outer space. It was searching for evidence of non-human consciousness. And that deep hole they drilled, they weren't looking for minerals. They were looking for proof that consciousness could be stored in crystalline structures. But here's the biggest revelation of all. The Soviet Union didn't really collapse. It transformed. All those secret programs, all that classified research, it didn't just disappear. It evolved into something else, something that's still operating today. Remember that computer that predicted the USSR's collapse? Well, it predicted something else too. Something that would happen 40 years after the Soviet Union's official end. According to the predictions, in 2031, all these separate threads, the consciousness research, the space discoveries, the time manipulation experiments, they're all going to converge. The artificial memories they implanted, they weren't random. The cities they created in people's minds, they weren't fictional. They were blueprints for something that hasn't happened yet. So what does it all mean? What really happened in those secret Soviet labs? What did Andrei Mikoyan see in space that connected to what they found deep in the Earth? Most importantly, what's going to happen when they open that building in Moscow? I don't have all the answers, but I do know this. The Soviet Union might have collapsed on paper, but its greatest secrets are still out there, waiting to be discovered. Or maybe, just maybe, they're waiting to discover us. Because if there's one thing I learned from my grandmother's journal, it's that some secrets aren't meant to stay buried forever. Sometimes they surface exactly when they're meant to. And sometimes the most important question isn't what the Soviet Union was hiding, it's why they wanted us to find it.